My name is Elena. I am 85 years old, and I am currently sitting in a living room that would have given my late husband a heart attack. There are books piled haphazardly on the floor because I ran out of shelf space and didn't care enough to buy more. There is a half-eaten biscotti on a saucer that doesn't match the teacup. There is a grand piano in the corner covered in sheet music that looks like it was scattered by a windstorm. And there is dust. Not filth, mind you, but dust. The kind of dust that dances in the shafts of afternoon sunlight, proving that time is passing, that life is settling, that things are existing. For 50 years, I lived in a home where dust was treated as a moral failing. For 50 years, I lived in a museum where the velvet ropes were invisible, but the do not touch signs were stamped on every piece of furniture, every conversation, and every emotion. I need to tell you about the trap. When people talk about bad marriages, they talk about the screamers. They talk about the drinkers, the gamblers, the cheaters. They talk about the men who raise their fists or the women who throw plates. Those are the tragedies that get the sympathy. But nobody talks about the other kind of tragedy, the quiet kind, the tragedy that looks, from the outside, like a triumph. I had the marriage that every woman in our social circle envied. I was Mrs. Julian Moore. My husband was the most respected cardiothoracic surgeon in the state. We lived in the big colonial house on the hill, the one with the white pillars and the circular driveway that was always swept clean of leaves. We were the couple on the top of the wedding cake. We were perfect, and I spent half a century suffocating in that perfection. To understand why I walked into the cage, you have to understand where I came from. I didn't marry Julian for money. Not exactly. I married him for orders. My parents were brilliant, passionate, and completely incapable of functioning in the real world. Our house was a kaleidoscope of color and noise, but it was also a place of constant anxiety. There was always screaming, sometimes in joy, often in rage. Dishes were thrown. Utilities were cut off because the bill money had been spent on new canvas. We moved 4 times before I was 12. I loved them, but I lived in a state of perpetual embarrassment. I hated the chaos. I hated the uncertainty. I promised myself that when I grew up, my life would be clean. It would be predictable. It would be quiet. I was 23 when I met Julian. He was everything my father was not. He was 30 years old, finishing his residency, and he moved through the world with the precision of a Swiss watch. He was handsome in a cold, statuesque way. He didn't have paint under his fingernails. He had surgeon's hands scrubbed, steady, capable of saving lives. When he looked at me, he didn't see the chaotic artistic girl. He saw potential. He saw raw material that could be refined. I was a pianist, then a serious one. I had just finished the conservatory. I played with fire and aggression. I poured all my repressed emotions into Chopin and Rachmaninoff. I remember the night he proposed. It wasn't passionate. We were at a restaurant where the menus didn't have prices. He took a small velvet box out of his pocket, placed it on the white tablecloth, and said, "Elena, I think we would make an excellent team. You have grace. I have ambition. Together, we can build a life of significance." He didn't say, "I love you." He said significance. And I said yes. I said yes because I was tired of the noise of my childhood. I looked at this man and saw a fortress. I saw walls that would never crumble. I saw a checkbook that would never bounce. I saw safety. I thought I was making the smart choice, the mature choice. I thought I was winning the lottery. I didn't realize that in order to live in the fortress, I would have to become a statue. The erasure of Elena began almost immediately, and it was so subtle that I didn't even notice I was disappearing until I was already gone. It started with the piano. When we bought our first house, the starter mansion, I was excited to move my baby Grand into the living room. It was my voice. It was the one place where I felt truly myself. Julian came home from the hospital one evening, about 3 months into our marriage. I was playing a Liszt etude. It was loud, tumultuous, demanding music. He stood in the doorway, still in his coat. He didn't yell. Julian never yelled. He just waited for me to stop. Elena, he said softly, rubbing his temples. It's beautiful, really, but the noise. Um, my work is very high stress. When I come home, I need a sanctuary. I need peace. That banging, it jars the nerves. He walked over and gently closed the lid of the piano. He kissed me on the forehead. Maybe you could play when I'm not here, or perhaps take up something a little more soothing. I felt a flash of anger, but I swallowed it. I told myself he was saving lives. Who was I to disturb a hero with my noise? So I stopped playing when he was home. Then, because he was home more often as he established his private practice, I stopped playing altogether. A year later, we redecorated the living room. The designer suggested the piano took up too much flow space. Julian agreed. I sold it. I told myself it was just an object. I didn't realize I had just sold my tongue. My new instrument was the house, and I learned to play it perfectly. By the time I was 30, I had transformed into the perfect corporate wife. My job was to be the scenery for Julian's success. I learned to host dinner parties for 12 people without breaking a sweat. I learned to discuss the stock market, the hospital board politics, and the local zoning laws. I learned to smile, a specific kind of smile, not a wide, gummy grin that showed too much emotion, but a polite, restrained curvature of the lips that said, "Everything is under control." End quote. We had children, of course, Michael and Sarah. I loved them with a desperate, aching intensity, but even motherhood was something Julian felt needed to be managed. He didn't want children who were wild. He didn't want finger painting on the walls or muddy boots in the hallway. He wanted miniature adults. I remember once, when Michael was 6, he fell and scraped his knee badly in the driveway. He came running in, screaming, blood running down his leg, looking for comfort. I fell to my knees to hug him, to get blood on my expensive dress, to rock him. Julian stepped in. He pulled Michael away from me, held him by the shoulders, and looked him in the eye. "Michael," he said calmly, "control yourself. Panic serves no purpose. Go to the bathroom and wash the wound. We do not make scenes." Michael stopped crying. He sniffled, nodded, and walked to the bathroom alone. I stood there, frozen. I wanted to scream at Julian. I wanted to say, "He's a little boy. Let him cry." But I didn't. I was afraid of Julian's disappointment. I was afraid of disrupting the peace. So I let my son wash his own blood off. And I learned that, in this house, weakness was not allowed. My children grew up to be just like their father, successful, brilliant, and utterly unreachable. They are in their 50s now. They call me on holidays. The conversations are brief. They ask about my health. I ask about their portfolios. We don't know how to talk about feelings because we never spoke that language in the house where they grew up. I look at them and I see strangers that I raised. The years didn't fly by. They marched. The 1970s turned into the 80 seconds. The decor changed from gold tones to pastels, then to beige. Always beige. Julian loved beige. It was neutral. It was calming. It was the color of nothingness. We traveled the world. We went to Paris, Rome, Tokyo, but we didn't experience those places. We inspected them. Julian planned every itinerary down to the minute. Breakfast at 7, museum at 8:30, lunch at 12. No deviations. I remember standing in a market in Marrakesh. The smells were overwhelming: spices, sweat, roasting meat. The colors were violent and beautiful. I wanted to get lost. I wanted to sit on a rug and drink tea with a stranger. Julian grabbed my elbow. "It's dirty here, Elena, and the crowd is unpredictable. Let's go back to the hotel. We have reservations at the French restaurant." We flew all the way to Morocco to eat French food in a silent, air-conditioned hotel dining room. I sat there, cutting my steak, and I felt like weeping. I was a tourist in my own life. I was watching the world through a pane of glass, sealed tight. But the worst part was the envy. Whenever we went to the country club or the charity galas, women would corner me. Women with messy divorces, women with cheating husbands, women struggling to pay tuition. They would look at my diamond tennis bracelet. They would look at Julian, standing tall and distinguished in his tuxedo, holding court. "You are so lucky, Elena," they would whisper. "Julian is such a saint. He's so stable. You don't know how good you have it." And I would smile my trained smile and say, "Yes, I am very blessed." It is a terrible thing to be envied for your cage. It makes you feel like you are insane. If everyone says you are in paradise, but you feel like you are in hell, you start to wonder if the problem is you. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe I was broken. So I tried harder. I polished the silver until my reflection looked back at me, distorted and trapped. I starved myself to fit into the size 4 dresses Julian liked. I buried the artist deep inside me until I couldn't remember her name. I turned 45, then 55, then 65. I had a moment of awakening when I was 50. I ran into an old friend from the conservatory, David. He was playing jazz piano at a dingy little club downtown. I went to see him, telling Julian I was at a book club. David looked old. He wore a cheap suit. He didn't have a Rolex. But when he played, my God, when he played, he was a king. He was sweating, grunting, laughing, pounding the keys. He was alive. We had a drink afterward. He looked at my manicured hands, my stiff hair. "Do you still play, Elena?" he asked. "No," I said. "I don't have time." "That's a lie," he said gently. "You have time. You just don't have the courage." I walked out of that club and sat in my Mercedes and cried until I couldn't breathe. I knew he was right. I had traded my soul for a heated driveway and a husband who didn't embarrass me. I almost left Julian that night. I had the thought clear as a bell: drive. Just drive. Go to a motel. Start over. But then the fear set in. I was 50. I had no money of my own. It was all in joint accounts that Julian controlled. I had no job skills. I had no identity outside of being Mrs. Moore. The unknown was a black ocean, and the cage was a warm, dry island. So I turned the key, started the car, and drove home. I fixed my makeup in the rearview mirror before I went inside. "How was the book club?" Julian asked, not looking up from his medical journal. "It was fine," I said. "Quiet. I stayed for another 35 years. Julian died 10 years ago. He was 78. He had a massive stroke while reading the Wall Street Journal. He died as he lived, quietly, efficiently, without making a scene. The funeral was an event. The mayor came. The hospital dedicated a wing to him. Everyone looked at me with pity. Poor Elena, they said. How will she function without him? They were two halves of a whole. I stood by the grave, dressed in black, and I waited for the grief. I waited for the crushing blow of loss. I waited to feel like half of me had been ripped away. But as the coffin was lowered into the ground, a horrifying, beautiful feeling washed over me. Relief. I felt the air filling my lungs, really filling them for the first time since 1961. I felt the muscles in my shoulders, which had been tensed for 5 decades, suddenly slacken. I went home to that big, empty, pristine house. The guests left. The children went back to their hotels. I was alone. I walked into the living room. I looked at the beige carpet. I looked at the coasters. I looked at the silence. And I screamed. I screamed a guttural, animal sound that had been stuck in my throat for 50 years. Then I went to the kitchen, took a bottle of red wine, and poured a glass. I walked back to the living room, and I still can't believe I did this. I poured the red wine onto the beige carpet. I watched the stains spread, a dark, jagged, imperfect blotch on the perfection. I stared at it and started to laugh. I laughed until I was weeping on the floor. The stain was ugly, and it was mine. The next 10 years have been a frenzy. I am 85 now, and I am trying to pack a lifetime into the sliver of time I have left. I bought a piano, a Steinway. I put it right where Julian's favorite antique armoire used to be. I play every day. My fingers are stiff with arthritis, and I can't move them as fast as I used to. I miss notes. I lose the rhythm. I am technically terrible compared to the girl I was, but I play with a passion that shakes the windows. I play loud. I stopped dyeing my hair. I let it go white. Julian hated gray hair. He said it showed a lack of effort. Well, I am done with effort. I am only interested in truth. I started painting again. I make terrible, messy watercolors. I get paint on the floor. I get paint on my clothes. My housekeeper was horrified at first. She tried to clean it up. I told her, leave it. It proves someone lives here. I invited new people into my life, not the doctor's wives. I made friends with the woman who runs the bakery, who laughs like a donkey and tells dirty jokes. I made friends with a young gay man who teaches music at the high school. We drink cheap wine and listen to records and talk about heartbreak. My children are horrified, I think. They visit and look at the clutter, the books, the abstract art on the walls, and they ask, Mom, are you okay? Is this senility? No, I tell them. This is sanity. This is me. But here is the hard truth. The truth that keeps me awake at 3 a.m. I am happy now, but I am angry. I am furious at the 50 years I wasted. I am furious at the 23-year-old girl who was so scared of poverty and chaos that she sold her freedom for a security system. I am furious that I let society convince me that stability was the same thing as life. I can't get those years back. I can't go back to Rome and throw a coin in the fountain and kiss Julian or someone else passionately in the street. I can't go back and hold my son when he was 6 and tell him it's okay to cry. Those moments are gone. They were stolen by the idol of perfection. I see young women today, and I see the same trap, just dressed in different clothes. I see you. I see you on Instagram, curating your lives. I see you arranging your smoothie bowls and your minimalist living rooms. I see you looking for husbands who check the boxes. High earner, good family, stable. and I want to grab you by the shoulders and shake you. I want to tell you that a perfect marriage is a coffin for two. If you are with a man who makes you feel like you have to be smaller to fit into his world, run. If you are with a partner who values the cleanliness of the floor more than the joy in the room, run. If you are holding your breath to keep the peace, you are already drowning. Don't marry for safety. Safety is an illusion. We are all going to die eventually. The only question is whether you will be alive before you die. I was dead for 50 years. I was a well-dressed, well-fed, well-respected corpse walking through a beautiful house. Now I am alive. My joints hurt. I live alone. I have no one to take care of me if I fall, but I am alive. Yesterday, I ate ice cream for dinner. I played a nocturne at midnight with the windows open, letting the cool night air mix with the music. A neighbor walked by and stopped to listen. When I finished, he clapped. I stood up and bowed. In my living room, in my pajamas, I bowed to the empty street. It wasn't a perfect performance. There were mistakes, there was hesitation, but it was mine. Don't wait until you are 85 to bow to your own life. Don't wait until the funeral to find your voice. Smash the plates if you have to. Spill the wine. Buy the piano. Being envied is nothing. Being admired is nothing. Being free is everything. My name is Elena. I am 85, and I am finally making a mess. If my story helped you, if it gave you the permission you needed to breathe, to break a plate, or to buy that piano, then stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. I have 85 years of lessons, mistakes, and little rebellions left to share, and I'm tired of keeping them to myself. Let's figure out how to be free together.